Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We welcome you to this week's edition of Between the Lines, coming to you from Beirut, Lebanon. I'm Franklin Lamb. The gathering storm. Are Israel and Iran headed for war? As another U.S. presidential election cycle nears its end, less than 7 weeks away, we are witnessing increased fear-mongering and war hysteria, threats and predictions of unprovoked illegal Israeli assault on Iran are once more flooding the media with dire warnings using such phrases as Iran is supposedly looming zone of immunity, which until recently was dubbed the point of no return. Earlier this month, the Israeli National Security Advisor Halevi, the former director of Mossad, was quoted as saying that if I were an Iranian, I would be very fearful of the next 12 weeks. U.S. congressional sources claim that this threat is part of Tel Aviv's campaign to force President Obama to order an attack on Iran before the November 6th U.S. election or risk losing his job. Meanwhile, Iranian diplomats continue to assert that the Islamic Republic has no intention of attacking Israel. Well, with us today on Between the Lines to discuss the escalating Zionist threats against Iran and lobby pressures on the White House to cover Israel's back, as Republican candidate Romney has pledged to do, apparently green-lighting an Israeli attack on Iran, is Professor Mohammad Marandi. Professor Marandi is a professor of English literature and Orientalism at the University of Tehran, and he's also director of the North American and European Studies Center at the University of Tehran. Welcome, Professor Marandi. We're very pleased that you could join us.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin our discussion with Professor Marandi, let's have a quick look at this report from our Beirut correspondent on the latest developments on this rush to war with Iran.
Over the past few weeks, headlines in Israeli newspapers have stirred fears over the possibility of Israel launching a war against Iran. But U.S. officials have said they doubt that Israel has made the decision to go to war.
I don't believe they've made a decision as to whether or not they will go in and attack Iran at this time. The reality is that we still think there is room to continue to negotiate.
As suggested by analysts, the increasing talk of war could be mere bluffing as a part of a propaganda war against Iran. Many are skeptical about Israel's capabilities if a military showdown against Iran were to take place, given many agree that Iran's nuclear facilities would not be completely destroyed in such an attack.
What I'm telling you is based on what I know of their capabilities, and I may not know about all their capabilities. But I think that it's a fair characterization to say that they could delay, but not destroy, Iran's nuclear capabilities.
Iran's Defense Minister General Ahmad Vahidi was quoted as saying that Israel definitely doesn't have what it takes to endure Iran's might and will, calling the Israeli threats a sign of weakness by brainless leaders. Iranian leaders dismissed the threats of a military strike against Iran over its peaceful nuclear program. Foreign Ministry spokesman Ramin Mehmanparas said, even if some officials in the illegitimate regime, Israel, want to carry out such a stupid action, there are those inside the Israeli government who won't allow it because they know they will suffer very severe consequences from such an act. The new Israeli civil defense minister admitted that the Israeli entity is going through a rough time. The Israeli population is internally divided over any unilateral action against Iran, while nuclear weapons are purportedly being developed in Iran.
To attack Iran, absolutely not. Let the United States lead this effort later on, which I believe that they won't do anything.
Also, the Israeli entity's location in the Middle East is precarious as it is surrounded by foes. Israel is trapped amid one of the most unstable regions in the world. In Lebanon, there is Hezbollah, the resistance movement which aims to defend the country from an Israeli invasion. In Syria, which is the link of the resistance chain, battles are raging. In Egypt, despite its peace treaty with Israel, drastic military and political changes are occurring. And a bit further, there is Iran. With Israel facing many fronts, internally and externally, war seems an unlikely option for the time being. But given the slightest possibility that Israel will strike Iran in the near future, it seems that for this action, there will be a strong reaction.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Professor Marandi, we at Between the Lines wish to express our shock by the news of the disastrous twin earthquakes last week at Tabriz and Ahar, and we extend our deep sympathies to the people who have lost their loved ones and belongings during this holy month of Ramadan. We hope for the injured a quick recovery.
Thank you very much.
Professor Marandi, the Iranian people and the government have been enduring some of the most severe sanctions ever put in place against any country. They've endured the murder of Iranian civilians, the drone surveillance, the covert operations, the aid to terrorists opposed to the regime, and constant threats of lethal violence against your country and the people. How are your fellow countrymen coping with such conditions?
Well, obviously, it doesn't make life easy when you have large numbers of people in the country who have to face greater difficulty as a result of inflation, which is itself due to the sanctions and the embargo placed upon the country. Life becomes more expensive for ordinary Iranians. Sometimes medicines are difficult to find in the market.
Aren't these exempted, medicines exempted from the sanctions, or are they affected indirectly?
No, they're all affected. Hypothetically, the objective of the sanctions, theoretically, is to prevent Iran from carrying out any trade. Because when you shut down or attempt to shut down the Iranian central bank, that means you're preventing Iran from importing medicine, grain, wheat, rice, anything. So the objective is really to damage Iran as severely as possible, to make ordinary people suffer as much as they can. That is the theory. Of course, the sanctions are not working nearly as effectively as the Americans and the Europeans want them to. And the Iranian economy continues to grow. People purchase goods, but there is greater inflation. Ironically, I believe that what the United States and the Europeans are doing hurts them in the long run more than it hurts Iran, because it makes Iranian public opinion more angry with regards to the U.S. Government, U.S. policy, and the Europeans. The idea that they are somehow supporting human rights and human dignity, yet trying to make ordinary people suffer, is extraordinary. It's sort of like what's happening in Gaza. The Europeans and the Americans constantly speak about freedom and democracy, yet when Gaza people vote for the wrong people, they force a siege upon the people and make them suffer. So in the long run, it hurts the Americans more than it hurts Iran, and it hurts the Europeans as well. But I think that in general, the Iranians will be able to overcome these problems. The Iranians currently do have an extensive network of trading partners, and indeed Iranian trade has increased dramatically with rivals of the United States and the Europeans, with China, for example, with India, and Iraq. Right now, the trade relationship between Iran and Iraq is booming.
You mentioned China. It reminds me of what seems now to many ancient history. But remember the isolation imposed on China, so-called Red China, and Mao Zedong's idea of uniting the people and self-reliance. I've understood that to some extent Iran has gone through something similar in that being forced into a position of self-reliance actually has made some progress that they might not otherwise have made. Is that the case?
Iran has developed a great deal, especially in high-tech industries, nanotechnology, the nuclear sector. With regards to Iran's military program, Iran 3 decades ago, and especially before the Iran-Iraq war, Iran produced almost nothing. Now it produces the most advanced surface-to-air missiles, surface-to-surface missiles. It produces submarines, aircraft, and also Iran produces civilian satellites and launches them into orbit. So this has all of these have developed, these different industries, at a time when Iran has been under Western-imposed sanctions. So Iran is developing a great deal, despite.
Yes. Let's focus now on the Israeli threats against Iran, starting with the presidential election, of course. Candidate Romney essentially seems to have given a green light with his statement of his spokesman, just reiterated the other day that if Israel acts, if Israel feels that it's got to act in self-defense, the Americans will be there to cover their back. I mean, this seems like a violation of the American Constitution, that we're delegating war powers to a foreign country. What's your take on that?
Well, without a doubt, an Israeli attack on Iran would be a severe violation of international law. It would be more than that. It would be a crime against humanity. And of course, I don't think that Iranians believe that Obama is really much different from Mitt Romney either. What Obama has already been doing to Iran is he's been carrying out cyber attacks on the country, which is a threat to the civilian population. Drones have been flying over Iran, which is a violation of international law. Iranian scientists have been assassinated, and the Iranians believe that the United States has been involved with that. The United States supports terrorist organizations, especially very violent ones on the border with Pakistan, leading to the death of many Iranians. The embargo, as I said earlier, is a major violation of human rights, and the United States is trying to force third parties from doing trade with Iran. So the intention of the United States is to make Iranians suffer. So there's not really much difference from a hot war and the sort of war that Obama is engaging with right now against the Iranian people.
Well, then what do you attribute? We can understand the genuflecting of both candidates to the Zionist lobby, but why do you think that the Israelis are apparently courting, and some say Netanyahu prefers Romney, if you think there's not really, the difference between Pepsi-Cola and Coca-Cola, if you will, between these candidates? Do you think this is an action to squeeze Obama at this time?
Well, Romney has the leisure of not being the president, so he can say things, and then later when he's president, it's not clear if he'll actually do anything very different. Netanyahu, I think, is not only looking at the U.S. government to put pressure on it to carry out some sort of attack against Iran. I think he's also using this as a tool to force increased sanctions on Iran, to gain concessions from America and other countries. In other words, the Israeli regime is acting sort of like a mad dog, and it's trying to force other countries to calm it down, to hold it back, and by doing that to appease it. In other words, they constantly say we're on the verge of attacking Iran. If you don't do something, we will. And then in order to appease the Israelis, the Europeans add sanctions against the Iranian people, or the Americans do so. So that is one objective. There's also the possibility that Israel would actually attack Iran, although inside Israel, most military leaders and intelligence chiefs of past are very much against this. It's unclear whether it'll actually carry it out, but I do believe that the Iranians believe that it's not in the interest of Israel to launch such an attack, because the Iranian response would be massive on the one hand, and also it would destabilize the region in a way which would hurt Israel. Right now, Saudi Arabia is trying to create sectarian hatred, racial hatred, and religious hatred in the region to sort of help the United States in this game of divide and rule. But if Israel actually does attack Iran, public opinion in the region would swiftly move towards Iran and support the Iranians in any war. And that would destabilize American allies in Jordan and in Saudi Arabia itself. So it wouldn't be, and it would also make the Egyptian government forced to take a more radical stance against the Israeli regime. So I don't think it's in the interest of Israel to launch any attack.
Okay, if we accept that thesis, then what do you make of the fact that there's also no public support for this? Apparently, you said that the opinion would shift in the favor of Iran, which I agree with that. But if you look at the American public, after Iraq, after Afghanistan, who's really in favor of this other than a few opportunistic Zionist agents in the Congress and of course, the lobby? Even in Israel, there's an increasing concern about this, demonstrations outside the Defense Secretary, Prime Minister's house. Europe also doesn't seem enthusiastic. So if that's the case,